thought they had banished us forever. But now, finally, we have returned.
Hello and welcome to another stream, Aim Team Riders Showcase. I am your host, Lord Captain Commander Dunn. If you would not mind, let's do the call to action. Like, share, subscribe, comment, that sort of thing. I mostly do it for fun, so you gotta do the call to actions because the YouTube algorithm says you gotta. But let's get some guests in here, starting off with...
Hey, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Well, I am very slowly making progress. Very, very slowly.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, shall we get started?
Bring in the nautical communist chap.
Nautical... Okay, I guess you could say that. Okay, let's bring him in. And
I've not been described as that before, I have to say. That's a new one.
Afternoon.
yeah. And let's bring in our good friend Tarek.
我が力、我が刃、我が狂気、我が狂気をもて見解せよ。エクスはーうがせエクスプロージョン。
Sorry I took so long. I was trying to decide which avatar to use. I got several good ones since the last time I was here.
Hey, no worries.
I think
For
I've
example,
the same one since the I think the second time I was on the stream.
Yeah, well, it looks cool.
That is actually pretty cool. I liked it.
that's one of the stickers in my server. It's Smug Tarek, and then we also have Surprise Aviana. Hold on. I just want to show this off.
Oh, so adorable. That is very chibi.
It came off a base. I paid someone $15 to do it, and I said, "Yeah, that's a her expression."
Okay. Nice. I like it.
Thank you.
All right. So Valerian has a bit of a time constraint, so let's let him go first.
Sounds good.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. This is... we're back to the Lady Margaret story. Previously on... Okay, the good guys are at the castle of Serthaton, which is being attacked by the Imperials because well, I can't summarize the whole thing. Basically, what happened was the emperor was lusting after the lady of the castle who was underage, and the parents wouldn't let her go. So, well, she didn't want to go there. So so the emperor killed her father, and so they wrote a remonstrance. So they sent an army under a psychopath. There are actually two people leading the army. One of them is sane, the other one is a psychopath, and they have wrought destruction and ruin. And so to continue, this is chapter 15, Stalemate. Refugees were streaming into Serthaton, bringing news of the Carthage of the castle of Tseniel. And the nearer the army got, the greater the influx of refugees begging for sanctuary at the castle. Their tales of the devastation wrought by the army filled Margaret with grief and rage. She had intended to wait for exalted Box, that's the emperor, to answer the petition and give parleying a shot. In the highly unlikely event that the petition would elicit any reaction whatsoever. But the response to their petition, after it had been, as she saw it, toned down for exalted consumption, had been murder and mayhem. Deep down inside, she had expected no better, but had been persuaded that they must at least give peace and negotiations a try. That had failed disastrously. Apparently, any appeal to justice and mercy would only lead to the mass murder of innocents. And these murderers were fast approaching her estates, slaughtering and raping her own people as they went. Pardon me. Her husband, Count Adrian, had not been of much help. The rationing had made him grumpy, and he hated danger and doubly hated war, and kept griping and insisting they should wait it out in the province of Darzaz. No matter how often Margaret insisted she would not abandon her people. He did appear gamely behind her when she made speeches of encouragement, but calmly said nothing much beyond, "I'm hungry." That hardly seemed an adequate response to the ravages of war. Ravage the war did, and the destruction had touched even Margaret's own officials. Her Castellan, Azergon's wife, had been gruesomely raped by Doraimi, his eldest son and crippled daughter tortured to death, and his ancestral home burnt to the ground. The news had just reached Azergon, and he had come to Margaret's library with tears in his bloodshot eyes, his graying hair disheveled, his belt of office unbuckled. Margaret put aside her book of strategy and rose to greet him. She did not have to do this, but thought it polite in view of Azargon's obvious grief. "May Ru, Mindaraj, and Sacred Nine console your grief," she said. "My lady, Grace's great graces," the Castellan blurted, with a clumsy attempt at a bow. "I told them they should come to Tserthaton, but my wife, my noble wife, said she would not leave my daughter, and my daughter, who cannot walk, was afraid to leave. By Kara, I swear it, my hatred for Sandaran shall endure forever, and shall be paid for with blood." He ended almost on a scream, then remembered his decorum and tried to bow apologetically, but staggered instead. "It is the lords," said Margaret. "Not the people of Sandaran, but the lords." "The lords of Sandaran," replied Azargan, pounding his fist. "No Kalaman lord did this, my lady." Margaret bowed her head. "I am sorry, but I fear I must go now to my meeting on the crisis with Barama and Muku. Do you wish to attend? I beg my lady to dispense with me for now. I have a need to be alone." Margaret bowed her head. "Do you take a rest for now? Then I shall seek your counsel later. I promise you any recompense I can give, I shall, and your blessed dead shall be buried with the highest honors. Not even God can recompense me for this loss, but I thank my lady." Margaret bowed her head again and hastened to her study, where she found Barama and Muku waiting for her. Muku sat upon a guest stool and, as usual, had taken out a honey tablet for notes. Margaret and Barama remained standing. Adrian had been invited, but had begged off as usual, not before complaining how loud and messy the peasant refugees were, and we should just go back to Zarzaz. And Ihalamu had nice cuisine, but was a washout otherwise, and he was hungry. "Forgive my delay," said Margaret as she rushed into the study. "I have been speaking to my Castellan, whose wife and daughter were raped and murdered." "There is no need for apology," said Muku. "You do right to comfort your official's grief." "I don't know about comforting. I have no comfort to give. I have had enough. Enough! Enough of asking exalted nicely. If you'll pretty please oppress the weak slightly less. Enough of sitting around while the court's minions massacre helpless minions. Enough. Enough, enough, enough. Is this what we escaped Chuggan rule for 2 centuries or so ago? I will sit around here no more. It is time to lead a sortie against these murderers. I'm with you, said Barama, stomping his feet. It's high time we faced off against these scum. Is that wise? Muku raised a deprecatory hand. He meant well, but did not realize that now was not perhaps the best time. The fact that Margaret was speaking at about thrice her normal speed and was dropping H's right and left ought perhaps to have been a clue, even if Kalaman was very far from being Muku's native language. Oh, probably not, snapped Margaret, slamming her fist on the table and accidentally knocking down several papers. Perhaps you should just write another polite remonstrance. It wasn't all that polite, interposed Muku as he crouched down to pick up the papers. He has a point there, observed Barama. Just so we can get attacked again, continued Margaret, ignoring them and waving her shoulder-length hair highly indecorously. You saw that what being wise got us. We shouldn't have bothered. Very well, said Muku, but let us at least plan what we're doing so that we can do the most harm to our adversaries and least harm to your people, whom we are sworn to protect. Agaraj Engnan Garaj. To rule is to protect the weak. He was in one of those quoting moods, which Margaret liked when she was in good humor, but just now she wasn't. I know what I'm sworn to do, interrupted Margaret. I don't need anyone to tell me that. Maybe you could take a break from giving lessons. You seem to think everything is lessons. Everything is just teach them this, teach them that. We've just been attacked and my people murdered and raped. Your bloody Terranian quotes won't help much with that, now will they? Can you bring people back by talking Terranian? Do you think Daraimi or Barunu give 2 spores about your Terranian? Calm down, Margaret, said Barama, raising both hands. We all want the same thing. Margaret made no reply and put her head in her hands. Finally, after a moment's silence, she raised her head and spoke. I'm sorry, blessed Muku, she said. It's not your fault. You keep saying to be cautious, and we try it and we get bitten anyway. I know, it's hard. Muku scratched his 3 tufts of hair thoughtfully. Ruling is hard when done right, and war is harder. As the jurist pointed out, Agaraj Lunnayanamu Ood. Can we have a look at the plan for those secret passages? Sure, said Margaret. Suddenly she didn't mind the quotations anymore. It's on the desk, assuming I didn't stupidly knock it over just now. I was going to make some last-minute changes to it. She picked it up and passed it around to Muku and Barama. Let me see how much this guy. For a second. Okay, Margaret, Muku and Barama. The latter, having placed the plans back on the table, drew his sword from his sheath and looked it over judiciously. But Muku looked over the plans again. I've never actually slain anyone with this, said Barama. We've had peace for so long, the barbarians don't bother us much where I come from. How I wish we could go out through the gate on horseback, you on starlight, and me on moonlight, he added. That would be a tale to tell in a ballad. So it would. Margaret's eyes shone, but she instantly sobered up. Unfortunately, it would probably lead to yet more innocents getting killed. She sighed and turned to Muku. What do you recommend, blessed? We'll need to find a way to ambush them without their finding out where the passages are and using them for their own purposes, said Muku slowly. The famous strategist Ojira said, Nangaranjai Gamanat Vakomuyu. Do not, in assailing your enemies, aid them. We want to break the siege. We don't want them to break our defenses. Now, I wonder. We'd best memorize the passages and above all the exits. So we'll be able to do this in the dark. Barama tried to straighten his hair, failed, and shook his head helplessly. Someone probably said something in Turanian that proves that's a good idea. Yes, said Margaret. An excited gesture. Then we can ambush them at night, attack, and return through the passages without them being able to follow us. It might also help to install some kind of barriers in the passages so we can keep them from getting through in the event they do find their way into any of the passages, suggested Muku, who had been busily scratching notes on his tablet. Good idea, said Margaret. I'll talk to my commanders about it and have them come up with a strategy. I have training in fighting, but none in waging in an actual war, which is a different thing. I best listen to their advice. That is why, said Muku, it is written, the king should heed the counsel of those who know. I know that one, said Margaret. It's from Varun's commentary in the Book of Sauron. Barama looked impressed, and Muku gave one of his occasional smiles. Yes. In Turanian, Agaram, Majinyaj, Jaishaisha, Nyanja. God, it sounds better in Turanian, said Margaret. Everything does, and let's hope Nihandra smiles upon us like he did on the ancient king, Odira, said Barama, who felt left out of the learned references. Or maybe the river Dathlon will rise up for us like the Angara did for him and drown them. Wouldn't that be nice, said Margaret. I'm not counting on it, though. This won't end well. We'd best break for luncheon, and then I'll summon my officers to a meeting. You'd best attend, too, if you're willing. We must strike soon, or they will. And that's that section.
Yes, I think, this really has opened my eyes to a horrible scourge that has been just plaguing our lands that nobody seems to be doing anything about. I'm sure we all know about it. The scourge of murder. These murderers coming over here and murdering whoever they please in the broad light of day. There really ought to be a law against murder.
Yeah, it's all this assault on crime.
Clearly.
Yes, we're in a Shakespearean mood today. Murder most foul, as in the best it is. But these most foul, strange, and unnatural.
And let me have a look at the chat here. Because yep, I read this. I've been reading this for some time, and we're finally getting somewhere. It's true. You murderers sure are a contentious lot.
Yeah, kinda.
I think murder's bad.
Well, you know what the real problem is? It's immigrants. They're always the problem.
Well, now that you mention it, these Sandoranians did come in from a different country, so you could sort of call them immigrants.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Like immigrants and Turanians, or immigrants and other Sandoranians, or immigrants and other immigrants. Damn, immigrants. They ruined immigration.
I caught that one.
And Becca is also on the anti-murder side. Based.
I don't know. I mean, I'm against immigration, but this is a tough one.
Unless it involves your wifey.
That's You
What
know,
do you change around the emphasis on the syllables, huh? Are you in favor of immigration or immigration?
immigration. You know what? You know what? My political leanings are kind of like the tides. They're not entirely predictable.
The tides are very predictable.
Yeah, well,
Good answer.
I'm not.
Fair enough.
Good answer.
Probably not unwise.
God.
All right.
So,
Overall, good stuff. We're finally seeing some progression, some additional progression going on. I'm interested to see how the battle concludes in the future.
yeah. Yeah, there's not going to be an awful lot of action. I am, in the chapter I'm working on now, I'm planning on doing an action scene, so probably end up having to ask advice about that. But even that's going to be like a kind of a generalized.
Mm.
Yeah, because it's not my strong point. The emphasis is kind of on the politics.
So you made a Star Wars prequel.
Oh, God.
Don't worry, he's a better writer than George Lucas.
I mean, let's face it. As far as the prequels go, they could have been worse.
Like we've seen
It could have been
we've seen that proven.
Yeah, they could have been worse. At least the last one was enjoyable anyway. It didn't make much sense, but it was enjoyable.
Yeah, even though Revenge of the Sith is technically the worst Star Wars prequel.
Yeah, but it's also the most fun.
Yeah,
The least draggy. Yeah. Anyway, that's high praise indeed.
Oh, actually, there was another. You mentioned the river Angara.
Angara, yes.
Yeah, that's going to be a rather interesting coincidence as far as my offering goes. But just curiosity, how do you get these names? Are they languages in your world? Are they drawn from elsewhere?
Yeah, they're languages. There's a Turanian language. There's also a Sandaranian language. There are a bunch of languages. Turanian is like the classical language, and Angara is a Turanian word, but it's one of the earliest ones I made up. So it's not derived from anything other than I was 11 years old and I thought that this sounded cool and Indian, and either Indian or Arabic. Either way, it sounded cool and exotic. So that's where the name Angara comes from, because it goes back to the beginning. But a lot of these names have most of the names have actual meanings or else have cultural references. Yeah.
Very good.
Because I'm big on the world building aspect of it.
Nice. Very nice
So-
indeed.
Yeah, I liked it a whole lot.
Thank you.
All right.
What are you thinking? Clockwise.
Yeah. You're up.
Okay. So, as you may recall from last time, something pretty serious has just happened. Shenna has been kicked out of the Magisterium. And not only a minute after, she got a mysterious offer from a certain Sebastian to possibly join a little thing called the Angara Consortium. So, we will see how that turns out in this week's offering, Chapter 29, Just Angara. The fog had lifted by the time the hired boat pulled up alongside the wharf at the heart of Gold River. Sebastian tossed a chalk to the boatman and dismounted without another word. Shenna followed him up onto the walkway and stopped to look about to reorient herself, Traveling by hired boat in Accra could be a little disorienting. Almost like vanishing in one spot in the city and popping into existence in another with barely any recollection of the journey itself. They had arrived at the crossing of two broad canals, each one easily 3 times as wide as the length of the hired boat that had borne them hither. A tall, arching bridge spanned the mouth of each canal as it emptied into the intersection, and at the center of the waters stood a small raised island of stone, upon which stood a bronze statue that Shenna might possibly have recognized if she had actually read the history of Accra. Boat traffic through the intersection revolved around the monument, keeping to the left side, as always, to avoid confusion. Shenna turned her attention to the building before her, a towering edifice of glittering marble that stood right at the corner, looking out across the joined waters. A broad flight of steps led up to a landing where columns at least as tall as the walls of the magisterium stood sentry before the main entrance, and above that, arches blossomed from the tips of the columns to support a further story, marked by a row of tall glass windows. South-facing windows? Shenna glanced down at the flagstones before her. Sure enough, her shadow pointed forward up the steps toward the towering building, and with the noonday sun directly at her back, there could be no doubt. This facade and its windows were facing almost exactly due south. Shenna's mind wandered back to what Kieran had told her long ago, that the reason there were no south-facing windows in Accra had to do with the magisterium forcing people to buy magic directly from them. It couldn't possibly be true, of course. That sort of thing was the stuff of fanciful conspiracy. But still, there had to be a reason for a building like this so prominently flouting the established convention. "Are you coming?" Sebastian called from the top of the steps. "Yes, of course," Shenna said, driving the conspiratorial nonsense from her head, and following Sebastian up the stairs to the entrance. She stopped only for a moment before entering, hesitating just long enough to see the dark, distant shape of Athanasius landing upon the stonework at the top of the nearby building. They entered at first into a small antechamber where a footman greeted them, and after a quick exchange with Sebastian, the gentleman nodded and vanished into a side passage. Shenna followed Sebastian into the main lobby, a towering hall with an arched ceiling possibly as high as the roof itself. They continued across the floor, elegantly tiled with swirling patterns of lapis and jade, and up a large curving staircase of marble that led to a second-floor balcony. There were plenty of other decorations to be seen, of course, long hanging tapestries of shimmering silk, delicate velvet upholstery softening the banisters on the stairways, braziers smoldering with sweet incense, brilliant white alabaster busts depicting the stern-faced patriarchs of yesteryear. Yet they seemed almost superfluous. The fine materials of the building and the vastness of the space were extravagance enough to make an empress blush. Finally, Sebastian stopped before a door of dark lacquered wood set into the frame that appeared to be as much gold leaf by weight as stone. The stylized carving set into the door spelled out the word "Director," leaving no ambiguity as to who the room belonged to. "You can go inside and have a seat," Sebastian said, opening the door. "It shouldn't be too much longer." "Thank you, Sebastian," Shenna said, and stepped into the office, only realizing as the door closed behind her that she hadn't actually given Sebastian her name yet. Well, that could be seen to later. Alone once again, Shenna looked around. This office, and it was surely an office as indicated by the large, expensive-looking desk at the far end of the chamber, looked nothing like Karna's squalid little lair. For one thing, it was a far larger space, nearly twice as wide, thrice as long, and with a ceiling twice as high. It was also far more comfortable, with a soft carpet upon the floor and an upholstered chair sitting before the desk in place of a simple 3-legged stool. The walls were paneled with the same dark lacquered wood as the door and the desk, though they were obscured in most places by towering bookcases and hanging drapes beside the windows. Shenna sat herself down in seat before the desk, gathering the bundle in her lap. She looked across the desk at the far more expensive-looking upholstered chair, done up in leather and brass as opposed to velvet, and then out the window at the traffic still lazily swirling about in the canal intersection below, and then to the bookcases lining the walls with orderly, almost featureless volumes, and then to the ceiling where 3 lamps hung from chains at regular intervals, and then to the... Was there anything else to look at in here? Shenna clenched her fist atop the bundle in her lap. If I have to sit and wait for someone else one more time... But her thoughts were interrupted by a sound. A thumping from outside the chamber, muffled almost beyond hearing by the walls and the door, but unmistakably heavy and thick. It repeated in a slow, lumbering rhythm, growing steadily louder as the source drew near. Shenna stared at the doorway, unsure if she should be afraid of what was coming, or even if it was safe to be afraid. Finally, the latch clanked and the door swung open. In stepped a man in a grey tunic and wide silk pantaloons with a large mantle of pitch-black fur set upon his shoulders. A heavy walking stick in his left hand hammered out a steady rhythm as he walked, and he carried a large canvas-bound book in his free arm.
"Apologies for the delay,"
said a voice like the rumble of distant thunder.
"But the accounts have a tendency to draw me away at inconvenient times."
The man walked along the bookcase, stopping for a moment to heft the volume in his arm onto the shelf and ram it into place between the other nearly identical tomes. And then he crossed behind the desk and set himself down in the chair. He looked impossibly old. His skin was wrinkled like a piece of dried fruit, as though it had been too large for him and had shrunk to fit his frame. His fingers, folded calmly on the desk before him, resembled tree roots, all twisted and gnarled with bulging knuckles and joints. His lips were thin and cracked, and his face was splotched with brown stains, as though someone had splattered ink across his face and it still hadn't fully washed out. Of course, age alone was hardly an oddity, especially for a wealthy gentleman who could expect to be spared the toils and hardships of a common laborer or tradesman. But there was something else about the old man. Something unsettling. Something wrong. And then she noticed it. The top half of his face, from the tip of his nose to the crown of his bald head, was draped in shadow, as though there were some unseen canopy or parasol hovering just above him. Well, the shadows weren't so dark as to conceal his features or hide his identity, but just enough to darken the top of his face. Except for his eyes. Yellow and bright they were, and sharply perceptive. They seemed to pierce right through the gathered shadows with undiminished brilliance, like a stalking predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They flicked up and down, taking in Shenna's appearance. All the while the man's face remained still as a carven statue, and a chill ran down Shenna's spine.
"Now then,"
the old man said, meeting Shenna's eyes with his strange golden gaze.
"Sebastian tells me you might make a good candidate for our consortium."
"I should certainly hope so," Shenna said, putting the old man's terribly disorienting appearance out of her mind for the moment.
"As should I,"
the old man said.
"But first I believe introductions are called for. You may call me Angara."
"Angara," Shenna repeated. "Like the Angara Consortium itself? Would that make you its founder?"
"More or less,"
Angara shrugged.
"And what shall we call you?"
"You may call me Shenna," she said, "and it's a pleasure to meet you, Master Angara."
"Just Angara will do fine, thank you," Angara said. "Now then, Shenna, I believe you were recently affiliated with the Magisterium.
That is correct.
But not anymore.
That is also correct, Shenna said warily.
Care to say why?
Angara asked without delay. Not one to waste any time, this Angara gentleman. Shenna hesitated. How much could she safely reveal about her time with the Magisterium and how it had ended? Perhaps this Angara gentleman shared her low opinion of the Magisterium, and so a furious rant about principles would resonate with him. Or perhaps he respected them as an established institution of Acre, and he would take umbrage on their behalf at any unkind words. Shenna supposed she could just say a matter of integrity, but then what would stop Angara from pressing her for further information? No, one way or another, she had to give him details. Well, you see, it's all to do with my research, Shenna said, unwrapping the bundle on her lap and holding up her book of notes. I don't suppose you're at all familiar with construct theory?
Perhaps you'll abridge the discipline for me,
Angara said. Oh, certainly, Shenna said. It is the art and science of concerning raising bodies from the dead and setting them to perform useful labor.
What sort of useful labor?
Angara pressed. And so Shenna began to expound upon all the sundry tasks which she, and Karna, though she avoided mentioning the woman, had employed constructs. She told of constructs set to mining, piloting boats, manufacturing crystals, hauling cargo, and a certain prototype that would have been able to switch between different tasks. Though she neglected as well how to mention how that particular experiment had ended. Angara listened intently, asking the occasional question, which Shenna easily answered. He clearly recognized the possibilities in Shenna's research. And yes, it was her research after all, she decided. Shenna had designed and carried out most of the experiments. The prototype schematics were all her own work, and of course she had put extra effort into collecting and organizing all those notes into a cohesive body of scholarship. Karna would have done her own part to lay the foundations of the discipline, of course, but without Shenna to bring a little order to that scatterbrained harridan's notes, she would surely be fumbling about with basic principles at this moment. And Karna would almost certainly protest her admission if she could hear Shenna, but then it was just as likely that Karna would claim credit for Shenna's work when her next crop of unfortunate students came about.
Very interesting, Angara said at length. It sounds like quite a profitable discipline. I can already see the potential applications.
I quite agree, Shenna said. But unfortunately, the Magisterium does not share the same opinion.
I'm not surprised, Angara said. We've had a number of contracts with the Magisterium over the years. They've been reliable enough customers, but I'm beginning to find them more trouble than they're worth. They claim that their purpose is to steward the knowledge of magic, but it's become more and more clear that their intent is to hoard all that knowledge for themselves, and then leave it untouched to gather the dust of ages.
A tragically accurate assessment, Shenna sighed. It was a sad thing for an organization like the Magisterium to have become so calcified and conservative when it was clearly capable of doing so much more good for Acre and its people. But it had grown lazy and rigid, more concerned with preserving its favored place in society than improving society as a whole.
Knowledge is only as good as what you can do with it. That's the way I see it,
Angara said. His eyes dipped to consider the book of notes sitting in Shenna's lap.
And I believe we can do quite a lot with this new knowledge of yours.
If you don't mind me asking, Shenna ventured, what exactly does this consortium do?
We make money,
Angara said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. I mean, how? Shenna clarified. Do you work in manufacturing, trade and finance? Do you provide services, or is it something else entirely?
We've never confined our operations to any particular quarters of the market, Angara shrugged. Diversification is key. It helps to lessen the damage from economic disruptions. And besides, your undead constructs may lend themselves to any number of profitable enterprises. No need to limit your scope at this early hour.
A fair point, Shinna said.
Returning to the matter at hand,
Angara said, drawing a blank sheet of parchment from his desk and beginning to take down a series of notes.
I'm very impressed with your showing, and I am prepared to offer you a position with the consortium. Your salary would start at 10 lath every month, with a 30 lath bonus at hiring. We also offer regular opportunities to earn performance bonuses, amounting to multiple Raj, as well as regular dividend payouts.
Shenna's head began to spin as Angara continued to rattle off figures and bonuses. So much money! And to think that she had barely an hour earlier gone to so much trouble to smuggle a mere 2 Shem 15 out of the Magisterium. And that in itself a sum that she could have barely imagined back in Riverwatch. Shenna was quickly ascending to new heights of affluence, and with even greater pinnacles of wealth already visible in the distance. And what was more, Shenna would earn all of that money on her own terms. No longer would she have to lean on the charity of friends or scrape by on a student's stipend. This would be honest wages for honest work. And the magnitude of her coming fortune would stand as a testament to the full value of her skills and of her undead constructs. Constructs like Yannick? Shenna's heart twisted in her chest at the sudden thought. She tried to force the guilty sensation away with the knowledge that Yannick had escaped that sorry fate, with her help, of course. But the larger point remained. Shenna's coming fortune would be built atop a foundation of the dead, not all of whom would have met with a natural or a peaceful end. And even if she were to be scrupulously careful when sourcing her cadavers, it was no guarantee that others would show such integrity.
Well,
Angara said suddenly, and Shenna looked up to see him regarding her strangely.
Do you accept my offer?
There is one thing, Shenna ventured warily.
Yes,
Angara said. It's just that, Shenna began. Well, construct operations are a complicated and dangerous field, and if I am going to make my services available to your consortium, I shall need an assurance that I will be fully in charge of their operations. Angara's yellow eyes narrowed for a moment.
Fully in charge of their operations?
Yes, Shenna said, and then added, along the entire chain of production. Angara nodded slowly.
You know your value, I see.
I do, Shenna said.
Very well, then, Angara said. It may cause a bottleneck further down the line, but we can address that when it arises. For the moment, I believe we can accommodate your request. Just don't let it affect your performance.
Thank you for your understanding, Shenna said, hiding her relief behind a mask of stone-hard neutrality. Angara probably read her request as just a simple negotiation tactic, and Shenna, for her part, had no great desire to disabuse him. And I would be delighted to accept your offer.
Excellent,
Angara nodded and put one last mark to his notes before folding the paper up and tucking it into a pocket.
Now then, we shall be convening a meeting of the consortium this evening out on my estate on Lake Moon. I expect you shall be in attendance. It will serve as a good opportunity to introduce you to our new co-workers and further acquaint you with our operations.
It sounds like a splendid idea, Shenna said.
Very well.
Angara stood up, and his walking stick resumed its steady rhythm as he hobbled around his desk. His right hand reached into his tunic and emerged once again with a glittering string of golden coins.
Your bonus at hiring, Angara said. 30 lath, as agreed.
Shenna rose from her seat and reverently took the string of coins. The first of many. Thank you very much, Master Angara. I won't let you down.
I'm sure you won't, the old man said. And once again, it's just Angara.
And that's that.
I know you described how the character looks, but have you ever seen the Tom and Jerry movie? He reminds me a lot of the lawyer from that movie.
I know. We've got to have money.
Dude would have been played by Tony J if he was still alive.
Yeah.
So,
Tony J was a god amongst men.
yes. It really makes me wish that this guy would be sticking around longer.
Aw, that's a
Spoiler, you're
shame.
going to kill them off?
Join me in a few chapters. We'll get to that when we get to it.
Bother. It reminds me a teeny tiny bit of Porno, but smarter and less decrepit.
Actually, this fellow might be even more decrepit than Porno. Yeah.
But he sounds less decrepit, even though he actually is more decrepit. It
The
sounds
mind
less
is
decrepit.
much more acute than the body in his case.
Yeah.
Let's see, what have we got? Oh, thank you, James Knightington, for the praise for my acting.
Indeed. Indeed.
Let's see. All right.
Yeah, I do like the character of Shenna, how she's kind of she's basically decent, but she's not, she's not without her flaws.
Well,
Exposed yet.
we like people for their virtues, but we love them for their flaws.
Yeah. So, I mean, because she's a teenage girl and also understandably excited at the idea of she thought she was going to be homeless and all that. And then now, she's in the money.
Yeah.
We're in the money. Come on, honey.
She's going to have more money and she knows what to do with.
Yeah. But she does still have principles, so that's good.
Yes.
Principles can be bought and sold, my friend. If you know the right price.
Of course, let us not forget the 97th rule of acquisition. Every man has his prize. Actually, I think it's the 98th.
What was it? Oh, now I remember what it was. I think it's the 33rd rule of acquisition. You must remember, an empty sack in honor is only worth an empty sack.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Every now and then declare peace.
I've got a version of that in my book prepared. I've got
Nice.
the integrity and an empty coin string is worth the string.
Nice.
Yeah, I've actually got them as chapter titles. See, this is like the first of part 2.
Right.
And the first chapter of part 2 is integrity. And the last chapter of part 2 is going to be ellipsis and an empty coin string.
I love it.
Oh, so you're actually incorporating the rules of acquisition into the story, or at least into the
Ferengi fool you. They don't have a monopoly on the rules of acquisition.
Yeah, I was going to say they don't have a monopoly, although they would love one for economics.
Oh, I'm sure they've tried.
Oh, I'm sure they've tried to copyright the word.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they sell off their remains at a funeral. So
profit motive.
Of course. So yeah, this is it's probably fitting that we're talking about the Ferengi now. The Angara Consortium, as we will later find out, is essentially the fantasy equivalent of a megacorp.
I love it when you can have a megacorp in a fantasy, like a medieval fantasy setting. It's so bizarre.
I know. We're breaking all the genre conventions.
Yeah, well, technically, Joe Abercrombie kind of beat you to it with the banking house of Valentin Bulk.
Yeah,
everybody's done everything first.
I guess there's the Iron Bank of Bravos too.
Although I guess if you want to go from historical view, I guess the East India Trading Company was a megacorp.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually accurate.
Yeah, they were. Yep.
Yeah.
Honestly, the
And
banking
Dutch East
house of
India Company before them.
Honestly, the banking house of Valent and Bulk makes the Iron Bank of Bravos cuddly by comparison. They are way more evil, mostly because of their boss. You Anybody who's read Joe Abercrombie knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Of course.
All right.
I believe it is Sir Bard's turn.
All right. So, admittedly, this one's going to be a short one today. But last time we left off, Aviana was having a day out with Silas where he took her fishing, and they just kind of had a father-daughter sort of day out. And so this chapter, is just another like few weeks, few days, week later sort of thing. But anyways, that's where we were last time, and here's where we are today. Aviana grunted as she flourished the ribbon in her hand, her black hair flying as she twirled it gracefully in the air. As the twirl ended, she started shaking her hips from left to right to the beat of Catherine's drumming. Just as Catherine was reaching the end of the song, she fell to her knees and spread her arms just as the ribbon finished its own dance and fell beside her. Very good, Catherine said, placing the drums next to her. I think you've earned a break. Aviana exhaled and fell onto her back, panting, sweat dripping from her forehead and onto the wooden floor beneath her. The white shirt and tan pants she had washed just the day before had become drenched in sweat. Not so easy dancing with a prop, is it? Catherine asked as she walked towards her. At least I didn't get it tangled in my legs again. Aviana laughed as she rubbed the growing bruise on her leg. At least you'd avoided hitting your face this time, Catherine said, smirking. Aviana rolled her eyes. At this point, she was uncertain who had caused more injuries, Catherine or Silas. If you think that's difficult, you should try dancing with a sword, Catherine said, picking up a practice sword and gracefully flourishing it in her hand as she bounced her hips. How do you do that? How do you do that, Catherine? How do you make everything you do look so perfect? Aviana asked, unable to hide her envy. Practice, little fledgling. It's always about practice, Catherine said, rolling up the sleeve of her red blouse, revealing light scars across her arm. Aviana sighed and returned to laying on the floor. I've been practicing, though. You have. And now you dance with the grace of a wounded doe, as opposed to a wounded dodo. Is that good? Aviana asked, imagining a dodo to be some kind of lizard with backward legs. Well, if you were of Kavlan blood, I'd still say your performance is an insult to our ancestors. Before Aviana could think of a retort even half as clever, Catherine continued. But seeing as you're not, I will admit, you have improved dramatically since we started. Aviana blushed as she soaked in the praise. I see that smile. Don't think my praise means you can stop working hard. I won't, Aviana replied as she sat up straight. Catherine nodded and took a seat next to her, running a hand down Aviana's hair in an attempt to straighten it. So, what's got you so happy? What do you mean? Aviana asked. When we first started, you moved like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. But over these last few weeks, you've become so much lighter. Also, you're no longer stomping each time you land, thank Tyrion. Aviana laughed. I guess I'm just feeling happy. Catherine smirked. Is it because you've been thinking of that Merrick boy? Are you hoping to impress him with my lessons? What? No, I don't think of him like that, Aviana answered, her voice shaking as her cheeks turned red as an apple. So you do like him, Catherine teased, poking her shoulder. Of course I like him. He's my closest friend, Aviana answered, trying to hide her face. Catherine giggled. I take it you miss him quite a bit. The color left Aviana's cheeks and a frown replaced her smile. I just wish I knew how he was doing, or at least that he's okay. Catherine nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. If he's as strong as you've said, then I'm sure he's doing just fine. Aviana smiled up at Catherine. What about you? What about me? Catherine asked, taking her hand off of Aviana's shoulder. Well, don't you miss all your friends from Kavlin? Catherine sighed. I do, but I receive letters from them from time to time. If you miss them, then why didn't you ever go back and continue performing with them? I just didn't want to dance anymore. Aviana pouted and crossed her arms. You said you'd tell me why you stopped dancing if I improved. Well, maybe I decide you haven't improved enough. If you don't tell me why, I'll start stomping again, Aviana threatened. Catherine started to snicker. Marcel and Silas have certainly taught you've become quite bold, if nothing else. Very well, I am nothing if not a woman of my word, Catherine answered. Her shoulders slumped and she unwrapped the glass beads from her hand. The truth is, I grew tired of traveling, never being able to keep a lover. New friendships I made would cease as soon as we've left. After so many years, it just starts to tear at your heart, Catherine said, looking towards the window, not even glancing at Aviana as she counted her beads. Then, one day I just found I couldn't do it anymore. But you can dance. You look so graceful when you show me the steps, Aviana protested. You should have seen me when I was in my prime. I would excite courts, kings, and gods alike, she said, smiling proudly before her frown returned. It was Madame Vadoma who saw how unhappy I was, suggested I find something new. So, why did you decide to stay here instead of going home? Catherine stood up and walked towards the window, looking out onto the city street, still thumbing the beads. Because when I was a child, I would always hear stories of Tyrion. Then, from my first day I stepped into the city as a girl, to the last day I danced at stages, I knew this is where I wanted to be. So, your last dance was in Tyrion then? My last official dance was a solo I performed exclusively for attendant retail, Catherine said proudly. You danced for an attendant? Aviana asked, almost unable to believe what she had heard. Catherine's proud smile beamed brighter. Every Blue Magnolia Festival, she requests the finest dancer to perform for her personally. I was the lucky one that year. But shouldn't you be rich, married to a noble, or at least have your name known throughout the country? Aviana asked. All those things were true for a time. That's the funny thing about fame. It leaves just as quickly as it comes, Catherine said quietly as her thumb skipped a bead. Aviana slowly got up and walked towards Catherine and wrapped her arms around her mentor's torso. Aviana didn't know what to say. She couldn't believe that anyone who had earned a god's favor could be forgotten. Catherine looked down at her and wiped a tear from her cheek and hugged her back. It was an interesting time, but I think I'm happier where I am now, Catherine said, her smile returning as she let go. Really? I have wonderful friends. I work somewhere everyone loves me. And I have a wonderful student who continues to surprise me every day. Catherine, Aviana didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone had called her wonderful. Thank you, Aviana said, her eyes watering now. Catherine said nothing as she wrapped her arm around her shoulder and comforted her student. And that's it for this week.
Aww, that was sweet.
Yeah, it was very cute.
That one went through quite a lot of edits, to be honest. Like, there was a lot more it kind of became a world building dump, but that kind of doesn't work for trying to make an entertaining story, so I kind of trimmed the fat there.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to do the same thing.
So, but yeah, one of the things we did find out though is Becca and I were watching Hunchback of Notre Dame when she was here over July, and I never realized how much I borrowed from that movie in terms of like aesthetic.
Yeah, it's got a lot of stuff in there that just stands out to you and kind of hits your brain, all of the Gothic architecture especially.
Exactly, but the other thing is that while Becca was here, we were talking about religion and all that, because my theory has always been like, if the gods come to you, like not in a through a cloud thing, like they're standing in front of you telling you, I want you to do this, you kind of can't have a state-sponsored religion. But then she helped me to realize that you don't need a religion, you just need the rituals of one in order to keep that sort of mystical side to it, which led to the idea of her counting beads, sort of like a rosary, if you will.
Yeah,
That
Makes sense.
And the whole entire idea of that is essentially one would mutter a prayer while they counted the beads. And it was rumored that, and again, this wasn't said because obviously this would detract from the chapter quite a bit. The idea is that like the gods can actually occasionally hear prayers, and that's sort of why this culture, who doesn't interact with them often, has prayer beads, literally. But for Catherine, who's lived in Tyrion for so long and has actually literally danced for gods, she does it because, you know, it's part of her culture. It's just something that she has done her entire life, and she finds it comforting.
Well, you know, we do forget how much of our experience of religion is, dominated by just ritual.
When I was in college, I took a religion class, like on the fundamentals of what makes a religion. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
There's some forms of paganism that mostly are ritual.
Yeah, or when I went to England for a few weeks ago, we saw the standing stones of Stannis, and they're even older than Stonehenge.
Did you say Stannis, as in?
Stannis with an E.
Okay.
I think that Georgia might have gotten it from there because it's a very significant place in the Isle of Orkney.
Okay.
But just to ask, because I never asked this question, what did you think of Catherine's characterization from how the story started? Where when she first, you probably don't remember if I'm being honest, but when she first met Aviana, she was she really didn't care. You know what I mean?
Very standoffish, yeah.
Very standoffish, if you recall.
Definitely see a difference. There's been some definite, character growth since the start when she first met Aviana, for sure.
I know I skip around in that a lot, but that's because like I like to show that her greatest ability is that she wins people over with how hard she's willing to try.
Hey, that's a good quality to have. I like it.
All right. If anybody else have anything they want to add or say?
No?
I think I'm good.
All right. I guess it's your turn, Done.
Alrighty. Let me summarize up until this point. We're actually reaching near the end of the second Dragonstrife. The villain has been defeated actually by her second in command in a duel after he decided to betray her and try and switch sides. The daughter of the guy who got chased out of the kingdom has now returned and is now going to claim the throne. And her father is now returning from exile on the island that he's been locked onto for the past decade or so, by an unknown figure who seems to know things she shouldn't about what is to come. So I think those are the main points for the summary that are important. Chapter 27, Dead Man on a Throne. Persephone advanced through the halls of Menendrakar, a team of her best orcs and human soldiers at her back. Whenever the troops saw her visage and her demonic sword, they fled before as if she were some sort of creature from the void. At one point, a pair of soldiers rushed to her, but when they got within reach of her sword, Persephone swung the weapon in a wide arc. The blade cut through metal, bone, and flesh with equal impartiality, slicing the two leaders in half at the waist. They fell apart. The blade parts of their bodies that the blade had passed through burning bright red. Covering up how sick she felt at the deaths, Persephone raised her T-shaped sword at the remaining soldiers. "Surrender now, and no harm will come to you," she promised. The enemy soldiers backed away, eyes clearly full of terror, then tossed down their weapons. The troops behind Persephone advanced and grabbed the weapons before marching the loyalists away. Taking a deep breath, Persephone motioned her soldiers forward before nodding to one of the groups. "Get me someone from Shard's forces and Chimera's troops each. I want to know where they are and why their troops were fighting." Google grunted and walked over to a soldier from each group. Open dragged them over to her by the scruff of their necks. "Where are your masters?" "The Altheans betrayed us!" The one wearing Chimera's colors yelled. "They must have defected to you. We are loyal only to Lord Shard." The Althean man shrugged. "Where are Chimera and Shard?" Persephone shrugged her sword into the ground and rested her forearm on the skull pommel. "I saw them dueling in one of the corridors that way," a loyalist soldier pointed. "I think they went up toward the throne room." "Move that way, then." Persephone adjusted her sword and hefted it. "Come on, I'll lead the way." Google shook her head. "She's a better fighter than you, and she has dark fire." "Who else can face her with dark fire in her hand?" Persephone held up her glass-like sword. "This can match that sword." "Fine, but it won't be one-on-one. We need to win, and this is war. No fair play." Google bared her teeth. "Very well, no stupid decisions." Persephone agreed, leaning her sword against her shoulder. Despite how easily it had cut through flesh, metal, and bone, it rested against her shoulder and stopped. When they reached the open double doors, Persephone stopped and stared at the throne room. Google cursed and motioned to some of her men to secure the area. Blinking, Persephone glanced at her sword and retracted the glassy blade into the hilt and placed it on her belt as she walked into the throne room. Chimera was lying on the ground, head facing the doors, dark fate driven through her socket and out the back of her head, blood trickling down into the scar over her other eye and onto the stone floor. Persephone walked over to her aunt and looked down at her, somewhat disappointed that he'd never gotten a chance to fight and confront the person who'd stolen the kingdom from her father. Now here the usurper was, the blade driven through her eye, the tip of the sword on the floor, forcing her head at an angle. Shaking her head, Persephone looked up at the throne. Shard Dragonless was sitting on the throne, on dark fire clutched in his bare hand, pieces of clothing burned, head resting against the back of the throne. So, he killed her. Persephone reached down and pulled dark fate free of Chimera's skull, a torrent of blood flowing at the empty eye socket. Taking a deep breath, she cleaned the blade off on Chimera's shirt, then walked over to the throne. Blood dripped from a wound in Shard's chest, red liquid pooling around him with a few stains around his hands where other injuries had been inflicted. "Remove him from my throne." Persephone pulled dark fire from Shard's grip, surprised at how hard it was to pry open his fingers. "Give them to their respective sides so that they can bury their leaders with honor." Even if he'd sided with Chimera initially, he'd done the right thing and turned on her. What had convinced him to do this? She wondered as she stared down at his body. The greatest warrior in the world, now gone. Gugul growled and looked about to kick Chimera's corpse, but she refrained. Come on, she motioned to the troops. Clean out the corpses. Persephone stepped aside to allow two of Shard's Altheans to walk up to the throne and remove the corpse after Chimera's troops had taken her body away. Breathing deeply, Persephone pointed dark fire at the throne and burned away the blood, then sat down on her ancestor's seat, still holding the black sword in her hand, and she placed it across the arms of her chair. I claim the obsidian throne, she declared. I am the Dragonlord. Silently, the assembled soldiers began pounding their gauntlets against their chests. Persephone settled back, taking comfort in the show of loyalty. How much it meant, it was to be determined, but for now it would do. Bale felt a strange sense of nostalgia as they approached the harbor near Karnas, a city built on the river leading toward Menendrakar. Run up our banner, he nodded to Torash. The Orc general nodded and motioned to the flag crew. With practiced efficiency, the crew ran, and the banner of Thanatos and Vagar intertwined up the mast to unfurl it in the wind. The black dragon and white and blue dragon battled in the sky as they had been in their final battle. As soon as it was visible from the castle, horns began blaring from the battlements to welcome them in. Leaning against the railing, he gave a mental nudge to Meles. The silver dragon rose up and snarled, then took off and shot into the sky. Right as she passed, Bale leaped off the deck onto Meles' back and flew toward the battlements as the other dragons flew up from the boats. Prince Bale, the lord of the castle, an unfamiliar man with braided white hair, called to him as the dragons landed on the battlements. We thought you were dead. The rumors of my demise have been rather exaggerated. Bale slid off Meles' back and nodded to the lord. I'm here to take back my mother's throne. The castle lord frowned in concern. We've heard various rumors that the capital has been taken by a large army out of the north. Numenor, Sarmatia, and Rune have already declared their fealty to a demon they're calling the Horned Queen, who has taken up the throne. Horned Queen? Shalia asked as she slid off Catastros. Is that just a title? According to the rumors, she actually does possess horns emerging from her head and strange scale-like armor, the city lord explained, motioning toward his own head for emphasis. Well, the world has changed very quickly in our absence, it seems. Bale took a deep breath and nodded toward Shalia. Have Eurydice fly to Harag and Sitharis while you go to Parthia. Of course, Shalia nodded. Where will you go? Camelane. Hopefully their old loyalties will be remembered. He picked up he checked judgment in its back sheath. If we're to fight this Horned Queen, we'll need all our allies together. You're going to the most dangerous location? The Lord frowned. Why? Because I'm the Dragonlord, Bale said confidently. It's my duty. The castle lord blinked, then nodded slowly. I suppose it is. From her vantage near the middle of the tower, Persephone looked out over her home, the banners of the Horned Queen flying from every tower in Menendrakar. Feels good to be home. She leaned on the balustrade, her armor shimmering in the bright sun. Shard's and Chimera's bodies were being prepared for their cremation later today. Even though Shard had never been a dragonlighter, what he'd done had merited him that honor in Persephone's eyes. Sighing, she looked down at the courtyard where the bodies were being prepared for cremation. She'd had in her mind that she'd be the one to confront her evil aunt and her conniving fist, but in the end they killed each other. Was your big plan for me to be a distraction? Persephone wondered. Nothing. Silence. Shaking her head, Persephone gave Cerberus a nudge. The massive dragon leaped from the tower and dropped to hang next to the balcony. Grinning, she reached up and scratched her dragon under the jaw, causing him to rumble in pleasure. "We did it, old friend." She leaned her head against his. "We're back home." "I wish the others could have been here." Cerberus swished his tail, baring his teeth at the sky. "I wonder where Meraxia and Tyrannus have gone." Persephone took a deep breath and shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Now the riders are dead, they'll find new ones." She stepped off the balcony and swung onto Cerberus' back and tied herself in. Like a bat hurling himself off his perch, the black dragon leaped free and glided to the courtyard, accompanied by cheers of adulation from the crowd assembled around the pyres. The orcs thrust their weapons in the air and roared, while the humans smashed their chests with their fists. Chimera, Charon, and Shard had been laid on fine pyres, fresh clothes placed on each of them. "The time of Chimera is over," Persephone declared. "No more will you live in fear that your Dragonlord will murder you in the night. I will rule with fairness and justice. Illusory rebellions will not be met with fire and sword, but with fair and equitable treatment." The humans who'd been under Chimera's rule threw their hats and other headwear into the air at the declaration. "By burning away these bodies, we leave behind this era of paranoia and insanity, and bring in a new age of prosperity." More cheers from the crowd. Finished with her speech, Persephone patted Cerberus on the neck. "Now, Cerberus," she murmured. With a roar, Cerberus blasted the three bodies, incinerating them in a torrent of black fire. Shard's wife, Irene, and her son watched the funeral with a strange expression on her face. Not looking sad, just contemplative as her husband's body vanished to ash. "Let the feast begin!" Persephone nodded toward the castle. "Everything is prepared." The crowd went quickly into the castle, all looking eager for the feast that had been prepared. Casually, Persephone dismounted and walked among her new subjects, learning their names, hearing their struggles, what they wished from her reign. She listened to each one in turn and filed them away. Some she could fix, some she would investigate, others she'd have to delegate to someone else. The feast itself was a glorious thing. Good food for everyone from Chimera's personal stores, brought up from Parthia, Harag, and ruined by the canals. Hundreds of orcs and humans drank and ate with each other, though the Althians were somewhat ostracized by the former loyalists due to their betrayal. Persephone didn't sit on the throne while the feast went on. She was among them, backslapping, toasting, raising cheers, and generally joining in with the celebration. Eventually, the feast had to die down, and the people went off each with a bag of money. That got an effusive thank you. After all the revelry, the castle felt rather eerily quiet. Sighing, Persephone went to her old rooms, then realized that her old rooms were the ones she'd stayed in as a child. So she went to her mother's and father's room. Thankfully, it hadn't been occupied in quite some time, and even after all these years, she thought she could still smell her father and mother's scents in the sheets as she snuggled into the bed. A single tear flowed down her cheek and onto the pillow. She remembered all the times she'd slipped into her parents' bedroom to stay with them, just because she loved being with them. Closing her eyes, Persephone clutched at the blankets and snuggled in deeper. The next morning, Persephone sat on the edge of the dragon tower, Cerberus leaning his head on the edge to allow her to scratch him on the back of the head and under the chin. "Seems so strange, doesn't it?" She scratched right in the joint of his horns and tossed him some meat. "Felt like the mountains were our home, and it's just weird being back here." "Exactly." Cerberus caught the meat and swallowed it before turning his gaze toward the sky, eyes contemplative. "Do you think we'll ever see our parents again?" "I don't know." Sighing, Persephone stood up and turned to leave, then frowned as Cerberus raised his snout and sniffed the air. "What is it?" she thought toward her dragon. Cerberus didn't say anything. He just growled wordlessly and clawed at the stones with his wing talons. Stephanie turned back and followed her dragon's gaze and frowned when she saw a glistening of silver scales in the distance. Frowning, she slid into Cerberus's mind, his thoughts becoming clear. The smell of his mother drifted on the wind, and a familiar smell that Persephone would have been able to pick out of a crowd. "Daddy," she whispered. Abruptly, Cerberus reared up, thrust forward his head, then roared so loud that the entire valley rang with the sound. It wasn't a roar of fury or meant to threaten. It was joyful. Without another word, Persephone clambered onto the back of her dragon and urged him on into the sky. With a couple of powerful beats, Cerberus leaped into the sky and rushed toward the gleaming of silver scales in the distance. Baal flinched when he heard the roar from Menendrakar as he neared Camelane, turning his head and melees toward Amon's gap. Persephone mainly sniffed the air and shot toward the gap. Another sudden roar, coupled with a familiar cry of "Daddy!" made Baal look up as a large orange and black dragon shot down from the sky and right in front of Melee's, forcing her to flap backwards. "Daddy!" The cry came up from the dragon's back as the black metallic-looking beast shot upward to fly next to Melee's. A figure with long silver hair and armor as dark as her dragon waved enthusiastically at him. The face was older than the little girl he remembered, far more muscular, and she had a pair of twisted horns emerging from her forehead. The large black dragon that Baal recognized as a much larger Cerberus with the metallic smooth segmented scales swooped toward Melee, snapping playfully at the slightly smaller she-dragon. "I thought you were dead!" Baal realized that he was crying and saw tears on his daughter's face. "I thought I'd never see you again." With characteristic boldness, Persephone took Cerberus slightly higher than Melee's, then leaped off his back and landed in front of Baal and grabbed him in a hug. "Daddy," she whispered, hugging him close and pressing one of her horns against his temple. "I've missed you so much." Baal didn't care that he was crying as he held his little girl close. "I was sure I'd lost you." He tightened his grip, which prompted her to do the same. It was a strange experience to have her be significantly stronger than him. "But now you're here, you've taken back the throne." "I did!" Persephone pulled back and smiled. "I had help, but Chimera is gone forever." Shaking his head, Baal touched his daughter's horns, testing to see if they were real. They didn't move or appeared to be anything other than growths of some strange bone-like material. "How'd you get these?" he asked. "I was changed, Father." Persephone ran her hand over the strange horns, seeming slightly self-conscious. "I've tried to file them down, but they're pretty much indestructible." "Incredible." Baal shook his head in amazement before hugging his daughter even tighter. "I don't know if I'm ever going to let you go." He cleared his throat. "I think Mother is going to have something to say about that." "Oh, bloody hell." Baal groaned. "Your mother is going all the way down to Sotharis. She's at least a day ahead." Persephone shrugged. "All right. I'll fly to catch her before she reaches the capital." "He's that fast?" Baal nodded towards Cerberus as the black dragon circled and nipped at Melee's, who snapped affectionately right back. "Come and see." Persephone slipped out of Baal's arms, then leaped into the open air. Baal let out an involuntary yell of sudden terror, then started laughing as Cerberus dived down and angled himself so that Persephone could grab onto his saddle horn and swing herself into the saddle mid-fall. "Race to the city, Daddy," she called, although she turned her black dragon toward the city. "She's just like her sister." Baal shook his head and leaned forward. "Good. I like her." Elise unfurled her wings and shot forward. The two dragons flew as fast as they could, but in the end, that monster of Persephone's managed to circle the castle first. "My father has returned!" Persephone called. "Baal of the House of Amon has returned!" So there's only 3 pages left. Shall I finish it up? Or shall we call it good for today?
Oh, finish it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chapter 28. The strife ends. Shalia was making her way towards Sitharis when a large orange and black dragon, black and orange dragon, shot in front of her and Catastros, causing the black dragon to flinch backward and roar threateningly. Think you can catch me, mother? That voice. Persephone! Shalia leaned forward and was about to urge Catastros to fly after the other dragon, but Catastros was so eager to see his son after so long apart that he was redoubling his pace before he could tell him to do so. Suddenly, Cerberus turned and rushed toward Catastros, then went into a spiraling dive. Okay, let's match that. Shalia grinned as she prompted Catastros to go into a mirroring dive. The two dragons spun around each other, their wings tucked in and using them more as directors rather than propulsion. Finally, right above the ground, Catastros and Cerberus split apart and flung open their wings, then began ascending higher and higher toward the heavens. Abruptly, Cerberus wrapped his arms around Catastros, neck nestling against his sires as they tumbled again toward the ground, locked in an embrace. Again, right before the ground could hit them, the dragons parted and descended toward the ground and glided toward the ground. Leah slipped her restraints free and clambered down her dragon's back while her daughter simply jumped down from hers and ran toward her. Shalia dashed to her daughter and grabbed her in her arms, then started laughing in amazement as Persephone picked her up and swung her around. You're alive! Shalia held her daughter close, not fully believing what was going on. You're alive! Swallowing back tears, she pulled back and put her hands on Persephone's cheeks, ignoring the horns that emerged from the sides of her forehead. There's no words, other than I'm just so happy to see you. It's good to see you too, Mother. Persephone leaned her head into Shalia's hand, smiling and crying. I thought you all were lost in the storm, and that I'd never see you again. The dam burst. Shalia started crying as she pulled her daughter in. Finally, she regained her composure and leaned backward, but couldn't take her hands off her daughter's arms. Have you seen your father yet? Yes, he's back in Minan Drakkar. Persephone nodded toward the north. It's all finished, Mother. We're safe. Nothing can ever hurt us ever again. The city celebrated the return of the lost voyagers for almost a month. Feasts, jousts, contests, and games filled the days. Persephone's reunion with Eurydice was particularly emotional. Those two had been close, almost indistinguishable from each other. Other before, RN. So much had changed. They still were two peas in a pod. Now, though, you look so different, Eurydice exclaimed as she hugged her sister. Persephone had smiled and flicked her horns. Well, now they won't have any trouble telling the two of us apart. No, they won't. Eurydice had laughed along with her sister. During the weeks of celebration, Bale had observed all the growth his daughter had made over the past 10 years. Persephone was a queen. He might be a small-scale leader, but she was a large-scale leader. The people loved her, even with those strange horns. They seemed eager to see her, or to talk to her, and many seemed in awe as if she had been touched by the divine. Finally, after the celebrations were finished, Persephone sat them all down and had a family meeting with all of them. So, now what? He asked. You've returned home, father, mother. Shall we all rule together, or shall we choose one among us to be Dragonlord? I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, Bale nodded to his daughter. You should rule. You are the liberator of the people, because you many wrongs were avenged. It was Shard who killed Chimera, not me, father, Persephone corrected, voice kind. That had stunned Bale when he'd heard it. He thought Shard Chimera's most devoted and dangerous servant, but in the end he'd been the one to unslay her. You've begun to repair the damage your aunt left behind. He took Shalia's hand. Your mother and I wish to support you in that endeavor. Thank you, father, Persephone. He smiled. I know I can do this. It's going to take time, but I know that we are entering a new age. The canals have already begun to increase trade, and now we're going to make it even greater. I'm going to start creating a standing army apart from the orcs. Nobody will be allowed to have their own private army within the capital. I don't want what happened to Chimera to happen to me. Bale listened intently to what his daughters planned and was surprised at how reasonable they were. She'd had a lot of time to grow, even as he had. How you've changed, my little girl, he thought as they all discussed together how to better the realm. You're going to be a great ruler. Finally, though, he, Shalia, and Amelisa went to their old rooms and held each other, silently enjoying each other's company. I never thought I could be so happy, Shalia smiled. It's so good to be home after all this long. Amelisa snuggled closer. Bale just held his wife close as they held him. The world was right again. Epilogue. Persephone. Persephone's eyes opened to see the slight figure of the pale maiden standing in the middle of her bedroom. I need you to come with me. Persephone pulled off her sheets and walked toward the ethereal creature as she floated away. It's been a long time, Persephone remarked as they walked through the castle, servants seeming not to notice them as they walked deeper and deeper into the tower. Where are we going? To a place that very few have ever been, the pale maiden explained with a slight hand motion. This way. She turned down a hallway and floated down the steps to the dungeon. Still confused, Persephone followed the spirit deep into the bowels of the castle. Finally, they reached a plain-looking wall near the base of the tower. What are we doing exactly? Persephone asked. Safeguarding what I've given you so it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The pale maiden nodded to the hilt at Persephone's side. That is a terrible weapon in the wrong hands, and I cannot safeguard its power. Persephone unhooked it and looked down at the object, then nodded. Very well. The pale maiden nodded and waved her hand. Instantly, the wall began indenting in a particular pattern. Then the entire wall split apart to reveal a large vault that held what looked to be several odds and ends. Strange glass orbs, swords, a large trident made of silver, and a book. A long trident made of silver, and a large book in what looked to be a place of honor. Is this? Persephone walked over to the book and opened it to reveal blank pages. Remembering her history, she breathed onto the book, asking the question, what was the power inside of Echidna's reservoir? The book's blank pages filled with letters revealing the history that the pale maiden had told her. This is Simon the Mage's tome. Persephone stroked the spine that turned the page, causing the words to vanish. This was lost before Megara ascended the throne. Not lost, hidden. The pale maiden stroked the trident, eyes growing half closed. Aemon built this while Megara was off on her war of conquest to hide all the objects of power that would be too dangerous to allow out in the world. Specifically, the trident and the tome. Are these the shattered seeing stones? Persephone walked to the glass orbs, then paused when she realized they'd been pieced together and held together with bits of metal. The semi-repaired remains, the pale maiden explained. They have no power at the moment due to a lack of a focus point. So they tried to fix them but never managed. Persephone surmised, touching one with an armored finger. Can they ever be fixed? One day. The pale maiden floated next to Persephone and ran her hand over the balls. It will require great sacrifice, but a focus point can be created that will be more stable than the one that Aemon shattered by overusing the power inside them. Sighing, Persephone placed her strange weapon on a small plinth that had been empty beforehand. Will anyone ever use this sword again? She asked, backing away from the plinth. It will be used, yes. The pale maiden looked away. And it will be the cause of great death and destruction. The next thing Persephone knew, she was back in her head, looking out at a red sunrise. The end of the 6th book in the Dragonlord Annals.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Valerian on this.
Way too wholesome to have been written by me.
Yep. It don't stack up. It don't stack up.
Yeah.
Am I the only one who thought of when the father returned? Daddy, you're back from the store with milk. I told them you'd come back.
I was thinking of the Waltons.
I came back with my cigarettes. What did I miss?
I was thinking of the
Apparently an
Waltons
entire
towards the end.
The Waltons toward the end.
La, 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 la. It's good, but it's nice, and it is nice to have something wholesome and
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all ready now and about to be published?
I'm hoping to publish this sometime later this year.
All right.
That's the hope. May go through some small changes, little editing stuff to make sure that it's all good. But yeah, this is almost ready. As is the sequel and the book after it. So I'm hoping to do. My hope is to get up to 20 by the end of this year. That's the ideal.
I did notice the Twain quote.
Do what? Sorry.
The Twain quote.
Twain quote. I'm not sure I follow.
Twain.
My rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually didn't know that was a Mark Twain quote. I
didn't know that either.
I heard that for the first time in the First Law. It's a common quote by Nicomo Koska, who is one of my favorite literary characters. He's just great.
It's become a bit of a. I guess it's turned into a meme or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was one small thing covering up how sick she felt. I wonder if concealing or hiding would be better.
Okay.
And
I can do that.
let's see. And Persephone and Cerberus, they were in the bedroom, and then they were flying. Did they go out on the balcony or how?
Well, basically, what happened was they. One was on a balcony, or what do you mean? Like they were initially on a balcony, and then they flew. Then she got on his back, and then flew down to the courtyard, and then went back inside. That's If I didn't convey that, that's on me.
Yeah, or I might have stepped away or something.
Yeah. Oh, there was one moment when she takes when she proclaims herself the Dragonlord. I couldn't help but think of Persephone as Toph, going, "I am Persephone. I am Dragonlord."
I am Metalord.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, makes sense. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Nice though.
Yeah, I'm just glad that I finally finished. So, Valerian, you've been here for most of this book and actually the last book, Battle of the Seven Suns. What do you think that this is a good ending for the book?
Yeah, it's a nice, happy ending, and I'm glad that she apparently isn't evil. I can imagine you ending a book I can easily imagine ending a book with the character turning into an absolute tyrant.
This one was more kind of an idealistic thing. The tyrannical stuff will come in a different book. And I'm planning. I've got a few plans in place that I need to write. I actually have done a significant amount of work on. Actually, so I've finished this is 5. I finished 6. I finished 7. I started writing 8. I haven't written much of 9, but I did write. I have 10. Is a lot of it's written already, and some of 11 is written as well. So all that really comes after that is 12 and 13, and I think 14. Though we'll see how much the story can contain after I get finished with one particular arc of things.
Yikes! Are you going Wheel of Time mode?
No. This is not a continuous story. It's basically like skipping multiple generations.
No, okay. Still, you're going to be doing a lot of. So the box set's going to be pricey.
Probably. I guess you could say that.
Well,
yeah.
you got to make your market somewhere.
Yep.
So, what were your any other thoughts and opinions?
I liked it.
Yeah. Decent ending.
Thank you.
It sucked.
But in
Thank
a good way.
Yeah, it was fun to write this, and I'm honestly just happy that it turned out this good, because I'm just happy it turned out well. Honestly.
Yep.
So, alrighty. Well, I think we'll call it good for today, boys. In terms of the plan for this week, I know that White wants me to respond to something later this week, so I will definitely be doing that. Maybe we'll watch Conan the Destroyer or the Jason Momoa Conan the Barbarian, which I'm interested to see for comparison's sake with the original Conan movie. But we shall see. Alrighty. We'll call it good for today. Thank you to all my guests. Thank you, Campolarian, for sticking around, and Tarek, and Commissar Carl. This was great.
Thank you, Blight Lord.
We're always glad to come on.
Alrighty. We'll see you guys later. Adios.
Have a riot.